Communication.
Hmm.
What does it truly mean to have healthy communication, either with your peers or, of course, in a relationship?
Well, it comes down to having full understanding with somebody. It comes down to the fact that we can trust them. That's one of the biggest issues we've got today is trust. Knowing whether the person who that we're talking to is telling us what telling us what they or what they're saying is actually true. That they are talking about the subject that we're listening to. The whole thing is that quite often what somebody's saying is not what they're actually meaning, and to be able to recognise that means then we can have a much better relationship, a much happier, and the end result is that we don't have the stresses that we've had.
Is that hard for people to understand the difference between the two and to gain that trust and to mean what they say?
Be able to read the other person. This is where we've got the biggest problem today, especially when we look at, say, communication through typing, through our emails, through text on Facebook posts and social media, etc. People will say one thing, but the way the other person takes it, it all comes from the way that one person is feeling as to how we then look at somebody else's text and how we then relate to it. And quite often that then ends up being a backwards and forwards argument that comes from that. So being able to recognize what is that person really saying, but it also means stopping and listening and taking time and confirming, always checking on what the other person is saying. Show them that respect. Don't assume that you know. And I know that in the research is showing that when somebody is starts talking about an issue that they've got, it's around about an average of 19 seconds before if somebody else jumps in with some advice, takes offense or whatever. So this is a big problem we've got today is the overreaction to things. And that is because, just about everybody is feeling insecure. Everybody's been through tough times. Everybody wears a mask. As I say, everybody pretends they're not wearing a mask. And we are a combination of how we've responded to everything in our life, how we've chosen to respond. And because of that, when we're listening to somebody, we're listening with that in the background. And that's when the communication always goes the wrong way.
I remember someone gave me the example when it came to communication. The difference between people is that they would say that, let's say, this is my favorite shirt. It has my company's name on it, and I love it because I made the shirt, Alan, and it means so much to me, right? A woman may go, "Are you going to wear that?" And to us, sometimes men will say that, "Yeah, you know what? I'm wearing this." To her, it means go change.
Yeah.
Right? Versus a man now, if you were to tell me, Alan, hey, Train, you know what? I think you should wear something else because we're going to dinner and it may not be appropriate. I completely know what you mean, right?
That's
Because I have
it.
a reference point. Is that what you mean when there's a difference in communications where maybe the reference point is different? It could be between the genders, between two people, whatever the case is because what you're saying, I'm taking it as I would say it instead of as how you're saying it.
Well, that's one side of it. The other side is as well that quite often people don't say exactly what they mean because they might find it, it's a little bit rude, but they expect the other person to understand what they're saying. Like with the woman saying, "Are you going to wear that?" And the answer from most men would be, "Yeah, I feel comfortable. I love it. As you said, it's your logo." But they didn't get the actual inference because the words that were said didn't match the meaning of what the person was really saying. It was assumed or expected to be assumed that we'd just take it, oh, that's a criticism. We shouldn't be wearing that. But if it was more polite in the way, like as you said, the man would say that, we're going out to a certain location. This, might be appropriate for that. You might even feel out of place when you see everybody else the way they're dressed. And so that has a bit more honesty in it. But we don't do that. Quite often it's just that also trying to abbreviate, just say something quickly. So to explain to somebody where we're going, what it's going to be like, takes a lot longer than it takes to say, are you really wearing that? Or are you wearing that? And this causes a
What
problem.
Yeah, why do you think then there's that? What are the obstacles that maybe men and women face when it comes to communicating to each other in a relationship to say that, okay, this is what I mean versus you should know what I mean?
Exactly. See, this is the thing when it always comes back to how that person is really feeling about themselves. you'll find that when somebody is quite arrogant in the public, they're very boisterous and everything else, there's usually a lot of insecurity behind it. Because somebody who's feeling really comfortable about life, etc., doesn't need to impress everybody. They're just enjoying life. But somebody who is being very, noisy, all the rest of it, you see young teenagers, for instance, young males in particular. It's a process they've got to go through because it's all about them feeling their position, where they fit within the other, with the dynamics with everybody else, who's the alpha, that sort of thing. So they will carry on at that sort of a level. And we look at them and then realize that that's all coming from insecurities. They're desperate to try and find out where they fit. And so they behave in that way. So quite often when somebody talks in a particular way, it's the insecurities and things that they're carrying behind them. And that's what we need to be able to recognize. But we end up taking offense from them because now we think that they're looking down on us. And that causes another problem. So we never really confirm anything. One of the things I always say to people is that we've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. And we should be using them in that proportion. But when we're using our mouth, we should be asking questions. And I always say to people, if you talk to somebody who want to understand something, ask every possible question you can, and then ask one more. And people will say, well, how can I ask an extra question if I've asked all the questions that I can think of? Well, it's very simple. And that is, from what you've been telling me, this is what I understand. Have I got it right? Because then you're into a conversation. If you haven't got it right, they can then correct you and say, oh, no, I meant this. So now you're having this conversation backwards and forwards. You haven't got statements being made at each other. I always say to listen to people to understand. Don't listen to them to respond. Because if you listen to respond, there's usually 2 conversations going on in your head. When you're speaking, you're thinking about what you're saying. And when you're listening to somebody else, you're thinking about what you're going to say next. And so we're not really listening to each other. And that becomes an issue.